The black Rolls-Royce sat in the community garden for 3 full days before anyone from the outside world noticed it was still there. It had arrived on a Thursday evening under a sky the color of wet concrete. The man who left it did not look back. He simply stepped out, closed the door with a soft, expensive click, and walked away into the rain with his shoulders hunched as if the city itself were pressing down on him. By the time the first gardeners arrived the next morning, the car was already covered in a thin layer of dew. Tomato vines leaned toward the front bumper. A child's plastic watering can rested against the rear tire. No one called the police. No one left a note on the windshield. The garden simply continued around the car as if it had always been part of the landscape. Marcus Hale did not return on Friday. He did not return on Saturday. On Sunday morning, a woman named Lena Torres stood at the edge of the gravel lot with her arms crossed and stared at the silent machine for a long time. She was 41, the unofficial caretaker of the Regent Park Community Garden, and she had seen many strange things in her years of working the soil between the old brick buildings. An abandoned luxury car was new. She walked around it once, slowly. The windows were tinted. The doors were locked. On the dashboard she could just make out the shape of a single red tomato and a folded piece of paper. She did not try to open the car. Instead she took out her phone, took 3 photographs from different angles, and sent them to the small group chat the gardeners used. Nobody replied for almost an hour. When the first message finally came, it was from old Mr. Desjardins, the retired mechanic who watered the beds every morning before the sun was fully up. That car has been here since Thursday night. I saw the man leave it. He looked like someone who had just lost a fight with himself. Lena put the phone back in her jacket pocket and looked at the rolls again. Something about the way it sat there bothered her. It was too still. Too clean. As if the rain and the dirt and the living garden refused to touch it properly. She went back to work. There were beans to harvest and a leak in the rain barrel that needed fixing. The car could wait. By Monday morning the story had begun to travel. A teenager on a bicycle stopped and filmed a short video. An elderly woman from the building across the street stood at her window for 20 minutes just watching. Someone left a small handmade sign leaning against the front tire that read in careful black marker, "This is not a parking lot. This is where we grow food." Still the car did not move. Marcus Hale spent those same 3 days on the 32nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Lake Ontario. He attended meetings. He signed documents. He listened to lawyers explain why the Regent Park redevelopment package needed one final push before the city vote. He did all of these things with the same calm expression he had worn for years. Only his assistant noticed that he kept checking his phone every few minutes, as if waiting for a message that never came. On the 3rd night he dreamed of the garden. In the dream, the Rolls was no longer empty. A small girl sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel. She was 6 years old and she had his eyes. She turned to look at him through the windshield and mouthed words he could not hear. When he tried to open the door, the handle would not move. The girl kept speaking. Behind her the tomato vines grew faster and faster until they covered the entire car like a second skin. Marcus woke at 4:12 a.m. with his heart slamming against his ribs. The penthouse was dark and quiet. Rain tapped against the floor to ceiling windows. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time with his head in his hands, then stood up, dressed in the same clothes he had worn the day before, and took the private elevator down to the underground garage. His second car, a dark grey Range Rover, was waiting. He drove east through empty streets while the city was still half asleep. When he reached the community garden, the sky had only begun to lighten. The Rolls was exactly where he had left it. The handmade sign still leaned against the tire. Someone had placed a second tomato on the hood. Marcus parked the Range Rover across the street and walked over. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly sweet, like crushed leaves. He stood in front of the Rolls for almost a full minute before he noticed the folded paper under the windshield wiper. It had not been there 3 days ago. He pulled it free. The handwriting was the same neat, careful script he had seen on the first note. "You came back. The car is still safe. But the garden is not. If you want to know why you left it here in the first place, come inside the gate at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. And this time, stay." Marcus read the message twice. The paper was slightly damp from the morning air. When he looked up, a light was on in a second-floor window of the building that faced the garden. A curtain moved. For a brief second he thought he saw a woman's silhouette, still and watching. Then the light went out. He folded the note carefully and put it in his coat pocket next to the first one. The sky was turning the color of old silver. Somewhere nearby a dog began to bark, short and sharp, as if it had sensed something that did not belong. Marcus did not get back into the Range Rover right away. He stood beside the silent Rolls-Royce and looked at the rows of raised beds, the leaning sunflowers, the child's bicycle with the missing training wheel. 3 days ago he had abandoned this car without understanding the reason. Now the garden itself seemed to be offering him one. He already knew he would return at 6 the next morning. What he did not know was that by the time the sun rose again, one of the garden beds would be destroyed, a child's drawing would be found inside his locked car, and the truth that had been waiting for him in this small patch of soil would no longer be possible to ignore. Marcus arrived at the garden at 5:53 a.m. the next morning. The sky was still dark enough that the streetlights had not yet switched off. He parked the Range Rover 2 blocks away this time and walked the rest of the distance with his hands in his coat pockets. The air was cold and carried the smell of wet leaves. When he reached the gravel lot, the Rolls-Royce was still there, but something was wrong. One of the raised beds near the back fence had been completely destroyed. The wooden sides were broken. Soil was scattered across the path. Young tomato plants lay crushed and half buried as if someone had stamped through them in the night. A plastic watering can was cracked in half. Marcus stopped walking. For a moment, the only sound was the soft drip of water from the rain barrel. Lena Torres was already kneeling beside the ruined bed. She did not look up when his footsteps approached. She was carefully lifting the broken stems one by one, checking to see if any of the roots had survived. Her hands were covered in dirt. Her breath made small white clouds in the cold air. "You're early," she said without turning around. Marcus stopped a few feet away. "You told me to come at 6. "I know what I told you." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "Someone came last night. After midnight. They didn't take anything. They just destroyed this one bed. The rest of the garden is untouched." Marcus looked at the damage again. It was deliberate. Not the work of an animal or a drunk. Someone had chosen this specific bed and ruined it with care. "Do you know who?" he asked. Lena stood up and wiped her hands on her jeans. "No. But I know why." She walked past him toward the Rolls-Royce. Marcus followed. When they reached the car, she pointed at the passenger window. On the inside of the glass, pressed flat against the tinted surface, was a small piece of paper. A child's drawing. Marcus felt something cold move through his chest. The car had been locked. He had checked it himself the night before. Yet the drawing was clearly inside. Lena spoke quietly. "I saw it when I arrived 20 minutes ago. The doors are still locked. The windows are closed. Explain that to me." Marcus took out his key fob and unlocked the car. The soft click sounded too loud. He opened the passenger door and carefully removed the drawing. It was done in crayon on a piece of notebook paper. A simple picture of a black car parked among green plants. Next to the car stood a small stick figure girl with yellow hair holding a red tomato. In the top corner, someone had written in a child's uneven letters, "For the man who left his car." Marcus stared at the drawing for a long time. His hands were not completely steady. Lena watched his face. "You know that girl," she said. It was not a question. He did not answer right away. He folded the drawing carefully and put it in his coat pocket next to the 2 notes. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. "My daughter used to draw like that. Simple. Always the same yellow hair. She was 6 when she died." The words hung in the cold morning air. Lena did not offer sympathy. She simply waited. Marcus continued, almost to himself. "It was 7 years ago. Car accident on the Don Valley Parkway. I was supposed to pick her up from school that day. I stayed in a meeting instead. Sent the driver. She never made it home." He looked at the destroyed garden bed, then back at the rolls. "I don't know why I left this car here 3 days ago. I only know that when I got out I could not get back in. Something in my body refused. I walked away in the rain and told myself I would come back for it later. I never did." Lena studied him for several seconds. Then she nodded once, slowly. 3 nights ago, a man in an expensive coat left a car in my garden and walked away like he was running from something. Last night, someone destroyed one of our beds. This morning, a child's drawing appears inside a locked car. None of this is random, Mr. Hale." Marcus looked at her sharply. "You know my name. Everyone in this neighborhood knows your name. she said. Your company is the one trying to push the redevelopment through. The same redevelopment that will turn this garden into a parking structure for the new condominiums. We've been fighting the city for 8 months. Yesterday, the final vote was moved up. It's happening in 9 days. She turned and pointed at the ruined bed. This was the bed that belonged to the kids from the building across the street. They planted it themselves. Whoever did this knew exactly which one would hurt the most. Marcus felt the weight of the 2 notes and the drawing in his pocket. The morning was growing lighter. A few early buses passed on the main street. Somewhere a dog barked once and then went quiet. Lena crossed her arms. You asked me yesterday why the garden is not safe. Now you know part of it. Someone wants this place gone before the vote. They're getting bolder. And somehow your car, your presence, your dead daughter style of drawing, all of it showed up at the exact same time. She took a step closer. I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Hale. And I don't trust men who wear coats that cost more than our entire yearly budget. But right now you're standing in the middle of something that involves both of us. So I'm going to ask you one question, and I want a straight answer. Her eyes did not leave his face. Did you come back this morning because you care about this garden? Or because you're afraid of what will happen if you keep running from whatever made you leave that car here in the first place? Marcus did not answer immediately. He looked at the crushed tomato plants, at the child's drawing in his pocket, at the silent black Rolls-Royce that had been waiting for him like an accusation. Before he could speak, a sharp sound cut through the morning air. Glass breaking. Both of them turned toward the far end of the garden. One of the upper windows in the building across the street had just shattered outward. A dark shape moved quickly behind the broken frame and disappeared. Lena's voice was low and tight. That apartment has been empty for 2 months. Marcus felt the cold settle deeper into his chest. Someone had been watching them the entire time. And now that someone knew he had returned. Marcus moved first. He crossed the gravel path quickly, eyes fixed on the broken window 2 floors up. Lena followed close behind, her steps lighter but just as fast. The building was one of the older brick walk-ups that still stood on the edge of Regent Park. Most of the units had been entered months earlier in preparation for the redevelopment. Yellow notices were still taped to some of the doors. The front entrance was unlocked. The hallway smelled of dust and old cooking oil. They climbed the stairs without speaking. On the second floor, the door to the empty apartment stood slightly open. Marcus pushed it wider with his shoulder and stepped inside. The room was bare. No furniture. No curtains. Only a single folding chair near the broken window and a scattering of glass on the floor. Cold air moved through the open frame. On the windowsill sat an ashtray with 3 cigarette butts, still faintly warm. Next to it was a small digital camera, screen facing up. Lena picked up the camera and turned it on. The last photo was time-stamped only 4 minutes earlier. It showed Marcus and Lena standing beside the ruined garden bed, taken from above. The photo before that was of the Rolls-Royce at dawn. The one before that was of Marcus arriving alone the previous morning. Someone had been documenting everything. Marcus took the camera from her hands and scrolled further back. There were dozens of images. The garden at night. The destroyed bed right after it happened. A close-up of the child's drawing pressed against the car window. And then older photos, dating back almost 2 weeks. In several of them, a man in a dark coat could be seen standing across the street, watching the garden for long periods of time. The man's face was never fully clear, but the coat looked expensive. Lena's voice was quiet. He's been here longer than your car. Marcus set the camera down. His jaw was tight. This isn't just about scaring people away from the garden. Someone is building a record. They're waiting for the right moment. He walked to the broken window and looked down at the garden. From this height, the destroyed bed looked even smaller, like a wound in the middle of the green. The Rolls-Royce sat motionless, black and out of place. Lena spoke again. 3 weeks ago, we received an anonymous letter. It said the garden would be gone before the first frost. No signature. No demands. Just that one sentence. We thought it was someone from the development company trying to pressure us. Now I'm not so sure. Marcus turned to face her. My company doesn't work this way. We fight with lawyers and city votes, not broken windows and ruined tomato plants. Maybe not your company, she said. But someone connected to the money does. And right now you're standing in the middle of it whether you want to be or not. They left the apartment the same way they entered. Outside, the morning was fully light. A few residents had begun to notice the broken window and were standing on the sidewalk looking up. Lena ignored them and walked straight back to the garden. Marcus followed. She stopped beside the ruined bed and crouched down again. This time she dug carefully through the scattered soil with her bare hands. After almost a minute she pulled something free. It was a small metal object, half buried. A key. Not a house key. A car key. The kind that belonged to older models, with a black plastic head and a simple metal blade. It was scratched and dirty, but still intact. Lena held it up. This wasn't here yesterday. I turned this soil myself 2 days ago. Marcus took the key and examined it. There was no logo, no number. Just a single deep scratch along one side, as if it had been used hard for many years. Before either of them could speak, Marcus's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out. An unknown number. He answered without thinking. A man's voice, calm and low, came through the speaker. "You're in the garden right now, Mr. Hale. Good. That means you're finally paying attention." Marcus felt the cold return to his chest. He looked around the empty paths and the surrounding buildings. No one was visible. The voice continued. "The car you left is not the important part. The important part is what you took from this neighborhood 7 years ago and never paid for. Your daughter's accident was not the only cost. There is still a debt. The garden is only the beginning." The line went dead. Marcus lowered the phone slowly. Lena was watching his face. "Who was that?" she asked. He did not answer right away. His mind was moving too fast. 7 years ago. The accident on the Don Valley Parkway. The meeting he had refused to leave. The driver he had sent instead. And now a stranger was connecting that day to this garden, to the ruined bed, to the child's drawing that looked exactly like the ones his daughter used to make. He looked at the old car key in his hand, then at the silent Rolls-Royce, then at the broken window high above them. Someone had been waiting for him to return to this exact place. Someone who knew things about his past that no one outside his old life should have known. And whoever it was had just made it clear that the garden, the car, and the memory of his daughter were all part of the same unfinished story. Lena's voice cut through his thoughts. "Marcus, look at me. What did they say?" He met her eyes. For the first time since he had arrived that morning, the controlled expression he wore in boardrooms was gone. What remained was something closer to fear. "They said my daughter's accident was not the only cost," he answered quietly, "and that the garden is only the beginning." A sudden wind moved through the sunflowers, making them lean toward the destroyed bed as if listening. In the distance a siren rose and then faded. Marcus closed his hand around the old car key until the metal edge pressed hard into his palm. He did not yet understand the full shape of the truth that was coming for him. But he understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whoever had been watching from that empty apartment was no longer content to simply watch. They had started speaking. And they expected him to answer. Marcus stood in the middle of the garden with the phone still in his hand and the old car key pressed hard against his palm. The morning air felt colder than it had 5 minutes earlier. Lena did not speak. She simply waited, watching his face the way she watched soil when she was trying to decide what was wrong beneath the surface. "We need to call the police," Marcus said finally. Lena shook her head once. "No. Someone is threatening me. Someone destroyed part of your garden. They were in that apartment taking photographs of us. This is beyond a neighborhood dispute." "If we call the police right now," Lena said, "the story becomes about a billionaire being harassed in a community garden. The development company will use it. They will say the garden attracts trouble. They will say it is unsafe. The vote is in 9 days. One police report could finish us." Marcus looked at the ruined bed, then at the broken window across the street. He hated that she was right. In his world, problems were handled with lawyers and security teams and quiet phone calls. Here, every move had a different kind of cost. He put the phone away. "Then what do you suggest?" Lena pointed at the old key in his hand. "That was buried in the bed that was destroyed. Whoever did this wanted us to find it. Start there." They walked back to the toolshed at the far end of the garden. Lena unlocked it and pulled out a small plastic box filled with random objects the gardeners had found over the years. Lost gloves, broken tools, a child's mitten, a few rusted keys. She took the key from Marcus and compared it to the others. None matched. "It's older," she said. "The style hasn't been common for years." Marcus turned the key over in his fingers. The deep scratch along the blade caught the light. Something about it felt familiar in a way he could not place. He closed his eyes for a second and tried to push the memory forward, but it stayed just out of reach. Lena watched him. "You said your daughter died 7 years ago on the Don Valley Parkway. Was there another car involved?" Marcus opened his eyes. A dark blue sedan. The driver ran a red light. They never found him. The car was stolen. No fingerprints that led anywhere. The case went cold within months. He looked down at the key again. A dark blue sedan. An old-style key. A scratch on the blade. The thought that formed in his mind was so sharp it almost hurt. Lena saw the change in his expression. "What is it?" "I need to check something," Marcus said. His voice had gone flat. "My company keeps digital archives of every major accident report connected to our insurance and legal files, including the one from that day. There were photographs of the wreckage." He pulled out his phone and logged into a secure server he had not opened in years. The files loaded slowly. When the photographs finally appeared, he scrolled past the images of his own car and the ambulance until he reached the pictures of the other vehicle. The dark blue sedan was half crushed against the barrier. The driver's door hung open. On the ground near the front tire, almost out of frame, lay a single car key with a black plastic head and a deep scratch along the metal blade. Marcus zoomed in. The scratch matched exactly. He showed the screen to Lena without speaking. She stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at him. "That key has been in this garden soil for 7 years, she said quietly. "Someone put it here, and someone else just made sure we found it." Marcus felt the ground shift under his feet, even though he was standing still. The accident that had taken his daughter had never been random. The driver who disappeared. The stolen car. The key that somehow ended up buried in a community garden in Regent Park. And now a voice on the phone telling him there was still a debt to pay. Lena closed the shed door. "Whoever is doing this knows things about that day that were never made public. They're using your car, your presence, and this garden to force you to look at it again." Before Marcus could answer, a sharp metallic sound rang out from the direction of the Rolls-Royce. Both of them turned. The trunk of the black car was open. It had been locked. Marcus was certain of it. Yet the trunk lid now stood raised, and something small and white was sitting inside on the black carpet. They approached slowly. Lena stayed half a step behind him. When Marcus looked into the trunk, he felt the air leave his lungs. It was a child's winter mitten. Pink, with a small yellow star sewn on the back. The same mitten his daughter had been wearing the day she died. The one that had never been recovered from the accident scene. Next to the mitten lay a single photograph, face up. It showed a dark blue sedan parked on a quiet street at night. The timestamp in the corner was from 7 years earlier, 3 days before the accident. Standing beside the car was a man whose face was partially turned away. But the coat he wore was the same expensive dark coat that had appeared in the photographs from the empty apartment. Marcus reached for the photograph with a hand that was no longer steady. On the back, written in the same neat handwriting as the earlier notes, were 4 words. She was never the target. The morning sun had climbed higher, but the light felt thin and useless. Somewhere in the distance a streetcar bell rang. Marcus stood with the pink mitten in one hand and the photograph in the other, and for the first time in 7 years the careful wall he had built around that day began to crack in a way he could not stop. Lena's voice was almost a whisper. "Marcus, what does that mean?" He could not answer her, because the only possible meaning was worse than anything he had allowed himself to imagine. If his daughter had not been the target, then someone else had been. And the person who had been watching the garden, destroying the bed, leaving the key and the drawing and the mitten, already knew the answer. They were no longer simply threatening the garden. They were finishing a story that had started the day a 6-year-old girl never made it home. Marcus sat on the low wooden edge of the nearest intact garden bed with the pink mitten in one hand and the photograph in the other. He had not spoken for almost 3 minutes. Lena stood a short distance away, giving him space, but her eyes never left him. The morning had grown brighter, yet the light seemed unable to reach the place where he was sitting. "She was never the target," he repeated under his breath. The words felt wrong in his mouth. For 7 years he had carried the weight of one clear failure. He had chosen a meeting over his daughter. Now someone was telling him the story had never been that simple. Lena stepped closer. Who was the target then? Marcus looked at the photograph again. The man in the dark coat stood beside the blue sedan with his body turned slightly away from the camera. The timestamp was 3 days before the accident. The street in the background looked familiar, but he could not place it. I don't know, he said. The police never found another connection. They said it was a stolen car and a driver who vanished. That was the end of it. Lena took the photograph from his hand and studied it carefully. This man has been watching the garden for at least 2 weeks. He knew the key was buried here. He knew about the mitten. He knew how to get into your locked car without leaving a mark. This is not a stranger who randomly chose you. Marcus stood up. The movement was sudden. I need to know who he is. He took out his phone and photographed the image, then sent it to the private investigator his company kept on retainer for sensitive matters. The message was short. Identify this man. Priority. Full resources. He did not explain the context. He did not need to. The investigator had worked for him long enough to understand when a request carried weight. While they waited, Lena walked him through the rest of the garden. She showed him the beds that belonged to different families, the small greenhouse made from reclaimed windows, the corner where the children from the nearby buildings came after school to water the plants. Her voice stayed calm, but Marcus could hear the tension underneath. The vote was in 9 days. Every ruined bed, every broken window, every strange incident made the garden look more like a problem than a community space. His phone vibrated 20 minutes later. The investigator had replied. The man in the photograph is Daniel Kerr, age 48, former employee of Hale Developments, worked in the acquisitions department from 2014 to 2018, terminated after a dispute over a property deal in the East End. No current address on file. Last known activity was 3 years ago. Sending full file now. Marcus opened the attached documents. Daniel Kerr's face filled the screen. Younger, cleaner, wearing a company badge. Marcus remembered him vaguely. A quiet man who had argued hard against one particular land purchase. The deal had gone through anyway. Kerr had been let go 6 months later for performance issues. The file noted that Kerr had filed a formal complaint claiming the company had used pressure tactics on local residents, but the complaint had been dismissed. Lena read over his shoulder. He worked for you. He worked for the company, Marcus corrected, though the distinction felt thin. I barely knew him. He knew you, she said, and he knew your daughter's schedule well enough to be near that intersection 3 days before the accident. The implication settled between them like a third person. Marcus felt the old guilt rise again, but now it was mixed with something sharper. If Kerr had been involved, then the accident had not been pure chance. And if the note was true, if his daughter had not been the target, then someone else in that car or on that road had been. Marcus looked at the pink mitten still in his hand. I need to find him. Lena shook her head. You need to be careful. This man has been 3 steps ahead of us the entire time. He left the key. He left the drawing. He left the mitten. He is not hiding. He is leading you somewhere. As if the words had summoned it, a new sound cut through the garden. The soft electronic chime of the Rolls-Royce unlocking itself. Both of them turned. The driver's door opened a few centimeters on its own, then stopped. No one was near the car. No key fob had been pressed. Marcus walked toward it slowly. On the driver's seat sat a single sheet of paper, folded once. He picked it up. The handwriting was the same. You have the name now. Daniel Kerr did not act alone. The person who gave the order is still inside your company. If you want the full truth, bring the woman who runs the garden and meet me tonight at the place where the blue car was parked the night before the accident. Come at 11 p.m. If you involve the police or your security team, the next bed that disappears will not be empty of people. The note ended there. Marcus handed it to Lena. She read it once, then again. Her face stayed controlled, but her hands had tightened on the paper. He wants me there, she said. Yes. And he is threatening the families who use this garden if we don't go alone. Marcus nodded. The weight of the decision pressed down on both of them. 9 days until the city vote. A man from his own past leaving a trail of objects that should not exist. A claim that the accident which destroyed his family had been deliberate. And now an invitation that felt more like a summons. Lena looked at the ruined bed, then at the children's corner of the garden where a small pair of rubber boots still stood beside a watering can. "I'll go," she said. "But we do this my way. No company cars. No phones that can be tracked. And if anything feels wrong, we leave." Marcus met her eyes. For the first time since he had stepped into the garden that morning, he saw something beyond caution in her expression. It looked like resolve. 11 o'clock, he said. They both knew the night would not end with simple answers. The truth that had waited 7 years was finally ready to step into the light. And whoever had been moving the pieces intended to make sure Marcus Hale was standing in the exact center when it did. The address in the note led them to a quiet residential street in the East End, 3 blocks from the Don Valley Parkway. At 10:57 p.m. the road was almost empty. A single streetlight hummed above a low brick wall. Marcus parked the Range Rover 2 streets away, as they had agreed. He and Lena walked the final distance in silence. The air was cold and carried the faint smell of the river. A dark figure stood beside a blue sedan that looked almost identical to the one in the old photograph. When they came closer, the man stepped into the light. Daniel Kerr had aged hard. His face was thinner, his hair streaked with grey, but his eyes were clear and steady. "You came," Kerr said. His voice was the same low tone from the phone call. "And you brought her. Good." Marcus stopped 3 meters away. Lena stayed slightly behind his right shoulder. Neither of them spoke. Kerr looked at the pink mitten still visible in Marcus's coat pocket. "I kept that for 7 years. I never knew how to return it until you left your car in the one place that still mattered." "Explain," Marcus said. The word came out flat and hard. Kerr nodded as if he had expected the demand. 7 years ago, your company needed one final property to complete the East End corridor package. The family who owned it refused to sell. They had a small house and a backyard where they grew food for half the block. The pressure started with letters, then visits, then threats. When none of it worked, someone higher than me decided an accident would change their minds. The plan was simple. Make the father late for an important meeting with the city's heritage board. Scare him. Nothing more. He paused and looked directly at Marcus. "I was told to use the stolen blue car to cut him off on the parkway and force him to stop. I refused at the last minute. I left the car on this street the night before and walked away. Someone else took my place. Your driver took a different route that afternoon because of construction. Your daughter's school bus was running early. She was in the wrong place at the exact wrong time." Marcus felt the ground tilt under him. Lena's hand touched the back of his arm, steadying him without words. Kerr continued. "The order came from inside Hale Developments, from a man who still sits on your board. He covered every track. I was forced out and told that if I ever spoke, the same kind of accident could happen again. I spent years trying to find a way to make the truth surface. When I learned the company was coming for the last community garden in Regent Park, the same land connected to that old corridor deal, I knew the pattern was repeating. I started watching. I buried the key where the children planted. I waited for you to feel the weight of what you left behind." Marcus's voice was barely controlled. "You used my daughter's death. You used this garden. You put people in danger." "I did," Kerr said. There was no pride in the admission. "Because nothing else reached you. Money did not reach you. Lawyers did not reach you. Only the place where people still grow food with their hands, and the car you could not bring yourself to drive away, finally made you stop." Silence stretched between the three of them. A distant truck passed on the main road. Somewhere a dog barked once and went quiet. Marcus looked at Lena. Her face was calm, but her eyes held the same steel he had seen the first morning in the garden. She gave a small nod. The decision was his. He turned back to Kerr. The board member's name. Kerr gave it. One name. A man Marcus had trusted for 15 years. Marcus took out his phone and made a single call. Not to the police. To the one journalist in the city who had spent years investigating the company's land deals and had never been able to prove the darkest claims. He spoke for less than 2 minutes, then hung up. "The files will be public by morning," he said to Kerr, "including everything you just told us. If you are lying, it will destroy you. If you are telling the truth, it will destroy him." Kerr closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, something like relief had settled into his face. "I am not lying." They left him standing under the streetlight. Marcus and Lena walked back to the Range Rover without speaking. The city felt different in the dark, heavier, and more fragile at the same time. 9 days later, the city vote failed. The redevelopment package was pulled after the board member resigned and the first wave of documents reached the public. The Regent Park Community Garden was granted permanent protected status. The destroyed bed was rebuilt by the neighborhood in a single weekend. Marcus did not attend the celebration. He sent the pink mitten and a sealed letter to Lena instead. The letter contained no excuses. Only a single sentence. The car is yours to keep or sell. Use whatever it brings to make sure no child in that garden ever goes without. Lena sold the Rolls-Royce 2 weeks later. The money paid for a proper greenhouse, new tools, and a small scholarship fund for the children who work the beds after school. She never saw Marcus again in person. But every spring, when the first tomatoes ripened, she left one on the old wooden gate with no note attached. Marcus Hale still lived in the glass tower overlooking the lake. He still attended meetings and signed documents. Yet something fundamental had shifted. He began arriving at certain neighborhoods without an appointment and without a security team. He asked questions. He listened. And on quiet mornings, when the city was only beginning to wake, he sometimes drove past a small community garden in the East End and slowed down just long enough to see the green rows and the children already at work. The truth had emerged, days after a billionaire abandoned his luxury car in a place that grew more than food. It had cost him the version of himself he had protected for years. In its place, something quieter and more difficult remained. Something that, for the first time in a long time, felt like it might be able to grow. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who still believes that small places and quiet decisions can change the direction of a life. And if you want more stories like this, stay close. There are others waiting.